it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next PB&J card class, and today is the third video in a series of 3 featuring the same stamping techniques but varying the different stamps for the projects. And here's a look at the card we'll be creating in today's video. I'm using Penny Black stamps Fragrant Flowers, Spiritual Snippets, and Footnotes to create the card. And just a side note, I will have a full supply list at the end of the video where I'll relist all those stamps, numbers, and names, as well as the papers, inks, and everything else that I'm using to create today's card. So just like the other 2 cards, I am starting by masking off my Canson 140-pound watercolor paper using painter's tape. The bottom piece of tape is 1.5 inches and those on the side are 1 inch. And I'm going to stamp this bouquet from Penny Black's Transparent Set Fragrant Flowers. I love this bouquet. I've stamped it a couple of times. It's so fun to color and there's just something sort of whimsical and elegant about it at the same time. I'm stamping it using VersaFine Smoky Gray ink. I've done it in the stamp positioning tool just because that watercolor paper is a little bit textured, so that way I could stamp it a couple of times to make sure I get a good impression. And I'm going to paint this just like I did in the other 2 cards with Distress Ink Re-Inkers. And I will zoom up here in just a minute so you can get a closer look at what I'm doing. But basically I put down my darkest color, or I put down the color straight from the brush onto the area of the petal that I want to be the darkest, and then I go back with my brush and blend that using water. And I start by putting the wet brush up into the white area of the petal, working down into the darkest area, and then kind of allowing that to bleed out and blend up towards the tip of the petal. Now this particular flower that I'm painting here has a lot of different layers and little pieces here and there, and I don't like to get too stressed out about getting those all perfect shading. If I see some areas that are little pieces near each other, I just try to go every other one, light, dark, just so that it looks full and has some dimension and contrast when it's finished. So here I've just zoomed up a little bit for you. You can see I'm putting down that Distress Re-Inker directly onto the area of the petal I want to be the darkest. Off camera there, I just rinse off my brush in my cup of water and go back in with water on my brush to blend that. And sometimes I turn my work as I'm going, just a little bit easier to get the brush where I want it to be. Again, here I'm putting down that Distress Ink Re-Inker, that nice dark. This color is Fired Brick. Now going in with just a clean brush, starting in that white area and working my way down, letting the water bleed out on its own. For the center of the flower there, I'm using Fossilized Amber Distress Re-Inker, and I'm adding a very light touch of that to some of the areas, light areas on the flower where it is red. I like the way those colors sort of mix together, and it kind of warms up that red flower a bit. The other 2 videos where I've featured these same stamping techniques, I've used the same colors of Distress Re-Inkers, and I will link to both of those videos down in the YouTube description box as well. Here I just added a touch of that Peeled Paint Re-Inker, and I'm just using an acrylic block as a palette for those inks, putting that in where I want the darkest color to be, and going back with just a clean wet brush to blend it. You can layer more color in while it's wet just to darken up the areas that you want after you see how it's dried. For this flower, I'm using Spiced Marmalade and using the same technique that I did on the leaves and the first flower. And you can certainly color in these stamped images with whatever medium that you prefer. This masked card design really lends itself to whatever coloring mediums that you like to use. I love the way that the stamps look so different when they're within this little rectangle on the card front. For this flower, I'm starting by painting in just a few of the sort of little flowers that are part of it using the Salty Ocean ink, and they're pretty dark. I'm not adding too much water. I'm mostly just using the ink directly from my palette. So instead of shading each individual petal, I just choose some of the littler flowers to be dark and some to be light. That seems to give it enough dimension and variation. There you can see I'm mostly applying water and moving that around so that some of those are lighter and some are darker. And I can go back in, picking up the Distress Reinker to darken up some areas. So this is a bouquet that looks like it's kind of complicated or would take a while to paint in, but it really, once you get going, goes pretty quickly. And there's lots of different ways and color choices that you could use with this to completely change the look. Once I had all of the flowers painted in, I'm going to do my background. So I'm first putting down just water, working sections at a time. And then for this background, I've decided to use Gathered Twigs Distress Reinker. So I put it down onto the wet surface nearest the flowers where I want it to be the darkest, and then I can go back with just water to blend that out. This is a great choice for a background if you're going for a vintage look, or if you've used a lot of color on your flowers and you don't want to distract from that on your background. I did the entire background like that, and once it was dry, I'm now going to use the Gathered Twigs Distress ink and an ink blending tool with a foam pad, and just add that ink especially right around the edges of that masked area. It doesn't look like much when you're first putting the ink on this way, but it really makes a difference when you peel up that paint to reveal the full design. Now before peeling up that tape, I'm going to do some background stamping. This is one of the stamps in the Penny Black set called Footnotes. I use this set all the time for backgrounds. Excuse my head there. I'm inking it with Gathered Twigs ink and just pressing it down. It starts out pretty light, so I stamp it several times to darken it till it hits the point that I want it to be. I said this in another video, but I like to start light. That seems the safest for me. I can always darken it up, but if I go too dark on that first impression, I'm stuck with it. So I like to start light and then work my way to a darker color. I've just moved that up, and I'm going to add a little bit more stamping. Just looking here where I want to apply the ink. I don't want too much of the stamping to overlap onto the flower petals. And then the last thing I will add here is my sentiment, and this is from the Penny Black Transparent Set Spiritual Snippets, and I inked that with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And here's my favorite part, removing that tape to reveal the one-layer design. Here's a look at that finished card. And I'll also give you a look here at the other two that I made using the same techniques. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as our website, and I'll link to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And here's a list of all the supplies used in creating today's card.